Yeah.
Welcome to CEO Money. I'm Michael Yorba. Thank you for joining us. I have Martin Litwak, CEO of Litwak Partners, on the show with me today. Martin, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
All right. You are an international attorney. You deal with wealthy families. Tell me what they're really looking for when they're in the process of wealth structuring and planning.
Well, of course, each family is different, but there are trends that are common to the region. Most of the families that I work with are very much concerned about the lack of rule of law in the country where they live. And then, as a consequence of that, they are also worried about confidentiality, privacy, and things like that. So even though a lot of people think that the main objective for these families is to reduce tax burdens, that probably come in third or fourth place. They are really much more interested in making sure that nothing will happen to the assets in terms of regulation. They are worried about privacy. They are worried about succession planning, personal safety, and then, of course, taxation.
Got it. Tell me about the tools you use. What are the most used tools for this process?
Well, generally, when we meet a family and start working on the structures, we start by discussing objectives, not so much legal tools. And then once we have clarity as to which are these main objectives, then we will use the tools that the family needs. And we can start with something very basic. Sometimes a will be sufficient. Of course, the will doesn't come with any asset protection component or any tax savings. So if there are other objectives, in addition to succession planning, we need to start thinking about corporations, about trust, about insurance, about family funds. And the last tool, the more dramatic tool, would be moving from one country to the other. I mean, when you have a family that cannot achieve their goals with all of the other tools we have in the toolbox, then they have to seriously consider leaving the country where they reside and go to a different country.
Now, there's pros and cons to using this variety of tools, one of which would be moving. Talk to me about the use and the pros and cons when you're dealing with the tax advantages and the locations of these tools with the people that you're working with. There's ups and downs, is what I'm trying to say.
Always, and I always say that there is no perfect tool. I mean, even for families with a similar net worth and similar type of family, we might be applying different solutions. Mm-hmm. And this has to do with also the level of understanding that these families have about the structure. You cannot put together a structure that then is too difficult to operate, for example. And I would say the general rule would be that if you want to have a strong structure that will give you a lot of protection against your government, that will imply that you will be losing control. So most of the time, what you need to balance are ideas like control, consistency, privacy. So if you really want protection, full protection, you have to probably set up a trust, transfer everything to a trust, and then the trust needs to be irrevocable, and that means that you cannot be operating your own account. And if the client wants to enter every day into the account and buy and sell securities, which some clients do, then that structure, which might be perfect in the paperwork, it won't work for this family. And this is what I refer when we talk about pros and cons. I mean, you have to really look into how the client would like to operate the structure in the practice, because this is all about helping families to achieve their goals, not to create complications for the families.
I get it. Now, you deal a lot with tax advantages for the reasons you do things. Open that up for us.
Yeah, of course. I mean, generally, there are two main advantages you can have from a tax perspective, and this, of course, depends on the country where the families live. There are certain countries where assets where income coming from foreign sources is not taxed. So as long as you create a structure outside the country, whatever happens in that structure will not create taxes. And that is very common in Central America. Most of the Central American countries have that type of system. In South America, that is not the case. You have worldwide income, like in the US. So whatever you earn, you will have to pay taxes, irrespective of where you have earned that money. In those cases, what you can look for is tax deferral. So making sure that you don't pay every year the taxes, but you will pay only when you get the money back into your pocket, essentially, from the structure into your pocket. And that in some countries is easier to obtain than in others. There are some countries where it's very, very difficult to achieve that tax deferral. And the only way to do it is to, going back to the example I mentioned before, setting up a trust and making sure that everything goes out of your net worth. If it is in your net worth, then you will not be able to defer. An example is Argentina, and other examples are Chile, Mexico. So that's kind of what families look in terms of taxation. Try to not to pay if that's possible, try to defer if that's possible, and sometimes you cannot achieve any of those.
Okay, now that leads me into the offshore structures and the key advantages. Is that where you wanted to end up with that, or is there more to the story with these offshore structures and key advantages?
No, I think what offshore jurisdictions offer to clients is rule of law, essentially. So, and going back to the first question you raised, if a client is looking for a country that offers rule of law, then Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, all those places have a much higher rule of law than Guatemala, El Salvador, or Venezuela. So offshore centers are very important in the economy because they provide rule of law, and also they're very useful in the terms of what is called tax competition or tax war, which means that, and I always try to compare this with low-cost airlines because it's easier to understand for people. What are the advantages of low-cost airlines? Essentially, because they exist, the traditional airlines cannot put prices higher than certain amount, and that is for the benefit of the consumers, even if they don't use the low-cost airlines. And with offshore jurisdictions, happens exactly the same thing. Because of the offshore jurisdictions, high tax jurisdiction cannot go over a certain threshold. And actually, we are seeing the US reducing taxes, China reducing taxes, UK yesterday promised to reduce taxes. And this is because offshore centers are putting a limit to what non-offshore centers can tax. And that's for the benefit of all of the taxpayers, even if they don't use structures.
I agree with you, 100%. Now you have a book. Let's bring that out.
I do. A lot of time clients tell me where I can read about this. Even lawyers at my firm say, hey, I want to read about asset protection. I want to read about tax competition, offshore centers, about planning. And there was no single book covering all of those issues. So early in the year, I decided to basically try to put all my experience into a book, which is a general book. It doesn't target professionals. It targets financial advisors. It targets clients, and it explains all these tools that we mentioned before: will, trust, companies, funds, insurance, international move. It also touches on offshore jurisdictions, tax competition, inheritance tax. It has explanation about different tax systems, the U.S. tax system, the Latin American tax systems. I think it's very useful for anybody that has any asset that needs protection. And I draft it in a way, I read it in a way that it's very easy to understand.
So what about the middle class? Can they access this knowledge and be able to use it to their advantage also? Absolutely.
I think that the key issue here, what differentiates the middle class from the rich people, is that when rich people make an investment, any investment, stocks, even a car, a piece of art, whatever, they are thinking not only in the revenues and the risk, which are the two variables that everybody looks at, but also how I'm going to acquire that asset and how I'm going to transfer that piece of wealth to the next generation. And I think that the middle class needs to think about that as well.
Where can we get the book, and what's the title?
Well, actually, the book is in Spanish for time being. We are looking to translate it to English. The title could be translated as, how the rich people protect their assets and why we should imitate them. That's the name of the book in English. And actually, it's in Amazon, so it's very easy to buy it in paper and in Kindle version as well. You're going on a roadshow for the book? Yeah, I've been presenting the book in Argentina. I've been in California earlier this week. I'm flying to Mexico and Panama over the next couple of weeks. We'll go to Uruguay and Chile by the end of the year as well. Yeah, I'm very much presenting the book throughout the region and making people aware of its existence, basically. Yeah. Martin, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I look forward to more interviews with you where we can start drilling down into the high-level topics we spoke about today. Absolutely, with my pleasure. Thank you very much for your time. My pleasure, too. All right, you've been watching CEO Money with Michael Yorba. Thank you for joining us. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.